sounds like we got a handful, dozen people out there. Again, this is part 2. I'm going to let Steve take over in a second here. I just want to give a quick debrief on what our objective is right now. We go back and forth in this model to allowing you guys to just do it and run your own numbers versus allowing Alex or Trevor or Steve or whoever to run the numbers for you. And there's a kind of a fine line here because we don't want you guys running your own numbers in a perfect world, because A, is that's time that is not the most efficient use of your time, but B, it can get really screwed up very quickly by one wrong number in the wrong spot. And so we encourage you guys to always go to Alex and team to underwrite, but we also recognize it's important for you guys to have some sense of what goes on in these models for 2 reasons. One is if you did need to change something and to be able to tweak assumptions a little bit, not to have to rely on Alex or anybody else for any minor change, so that you guys are equipped to do that on your own. But secondly, the more you understand the model, I think the more educated you will get on how the different inputs impact the various scenarios. So we want to take the opportunity to not only do a recap of what we talked about last time, but to dive into the model itself so you guys have some familiarity with it. But just want to stress again, this is not intended for you guys to be off running and spending hours on end putting numbers into models. So with that said, I'm going to turn over to Steve and Trevor.
Yeah, well, and I'll just build on what Dave said real quick. I mean, first and foremost, the goal here is to help everybody become more financially literate in all the different items that are encompassed in not just a model like this, but the underwriting process in general and the whole financial side of things, right? And I think what Dave said is spot on, is not trying to put anybody in a spot of going and reproducing all this work on their own. They're resources to utilize and leverage to do that. At the same time, I think it's always great if somebody's curious and wants to get in the middle of something like this and take a few minutes and play around with it, because when it's all said and done, you learn the most and you learn it the most quickly by just getting in the middle of things and trying it out, right? So I think there's a nice little balance there, and as you do that, always know that there are resources, obviously starting with Alex, and then Trevor and I here as we can help as well to answer questions and to help guide anybody along in the process, because like I was saying, this is the kind of thing you're going to learn by paying attention to it, spending a little bit of time with it, and making of it what you like. So with that being said, Trev, was there anything you wanted to add in?
Get to it.
So what we thought we would do today is Trev and I are using a sample deal here that we've worked on recently, and we're going to go through and just utilize this model to show how much some of the different variables will affect your underlying land value as you change things around, right? Because as you probably have heard us say, or I know if I haven't said it, Adam said it very loudly and clearly, the outputs and the values that come out of these models are only as good as the inputs that we put into them, right? And that's why, as we look at this, and we'll go through things like talking about how many absorptions you're going to get a month, what the premiums or the upgrades are on your revenues, what the home building cycle is on each of the homes, can have a surprisingly large impact on where things come in at the end of the day. And I noticed Mike's laughing over here because
I lost my socks on it.
We'll just put some color on that. Mike had a deal recently that we're working on, and just the premium and the upgrade input alone was having drastic effects on what the ultimate residual value was. So just wanted to give some color as to why we're laughing over here, and some recent experiences to really demonstrate what those movements are.
Yeah. So before we really dive headfirst into this deal that we have in front of us, does anybody have any questions that they want to go over first? Anything that we want to review or just catch up on in general? All right, fair enough.
I'm taking advantage of it, calling Trevor directly. I'm set.
So let's go ahead and start by going back to just a quick refresher on what are the key metrics that we want to follow in all these home building and land development deals, right? And as you may recall from last time, the real key variables are going to be balancing out the internal rate of return, aka the IRR, with the equity multiple in the deals and the net profit margin that the builder and or land developer is going to be achieving, right? And, typically we always start with the IRR because that is kind of the go-to metric when you say, Dave, at the end of the day, that's the first thing that you kind of have to check the box on, which, as you may recall, we typically look at that and the kind of returns that capital's looking for in the kind of deals that we all work on can be anywhere from, mid to high teens all the way up to much higher numbers. So we start by looking at that, but also have to remember to understand that IRR is a function of time, right? And by way of example, if you give me $1 today and next month I give you back $1.10, the IRR on that investment's like 125%, but you only made 10 cents. So that's where we bring in things like equity multiple and balancing that out. And as we talked about before, equity multiple is for every dollar I invest, how much do I get back? And it's purely a function of a nice simple way of expressing what's the overall profitability of the deal.
I've got a question.
Go for it.
So for IRR and equity multiple, do we want to look at the unleveraged, leveraged, or is both of them?
We want to look at both. Okay, when it's all said and done, leveraged returns are always going to be the best, the returns that we want to look at, because that's what ultimately accounts for the actual dollars that an investor is putting in the deal and the actual dollars that are coming back. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's what your clients and their finance teams are going to be focusing on. Okay, that being said, when you look at the difference between the two, as opposed to getting too detailed about this, the simple way you'd look at it, the reason that you look at the delta between the two, is to understand how reliant on leverage a deal is, which is a function of how risky a project is. You also want to be paying attention to it because if I'm sitting in your shoes and looking at a land developer or a home builder that's coming along and looking at an asset that I'm marketing, the ability for them to obtain or not to obtain leverage does have a drastic potential impact on the value of the asset that you're selling off. And your ability to assess, at least at a high level, the ability of that prospective buyer to obtain leverage, I believe, is one of the most valuable things that you can do to help out your client. Right? From a finance...
Say that again.
Sure.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Okay. The ability to determine whether or not a prospective buyer of an asset you're selling can obtain leverage, or at least, and certainly the leverage that they're representing, i.e., are they financeable? If they're telling you, I'm going to go get a bank loan to build these homes, do we really think that they can get a bank loan? If you can make a good assessment of that in the process of vetting out offers, I think you are doing a tremendous service to your client. That is a real value add in the process, because the inability of them to find that source of capital is one of the things that's the most likely to either blow up the deal or bring them back to the table for a retrade, right? It's, as I think about these deals, probably the only thing it's second to in terms of risk and blowing up an escrow is a cost to complete analysis.
Agreed.
You're also talking mainly privates, right?
That's correct.
That would lever up as opposed to publics?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because a public is typically not going to be using a bank or any debt that's secured by the asset. They're handling that at a corporate level. But we also have been working on some stuff we can walk through if we'd like to, how we can look at this same analysis more from a public home builder's perspective than we would from a private perspective. Okay, the last metric in here, which I know everybody is constantly paying attention to, is what is the net profit line item, right? And it's the balancing out of all these different numbers at the end of the day to triangulate a value, to make sure that if they all check the box or at least kind of fit within that box a little bit, that we're looking at numbers that make sense that help to back into and support the valuation, right? So, we talked about IRR, kind of 15 to 18 plus, depending upon who your buyer is going to be, on an equity multiple deal, and this is the kind of thing too that would always encourage you to feel free to email us or reach out, is the profile of every deal is going to be different as we look at these items. So it's not just understanding what are the items that a prospective buyer is going to be looking at, it's understanding what are the ranges of requirements they're going to have on those items, right? So for instance, in today's world, we might see a private home builder say, I'll do this deal at a leveraged 1.6x equity multiple, which means if I invested $1 million, when the deal's done, I get my $1 million back and $600,000 of profit. Okay, and that might be enough from an equity multiple point to say I'll do it. But if somebody looks at that and says, well, you're only getting a 7 or 8% net margin on the homes to get there, that tells you they're having to turn a whole lot over, and they're not making very much. They're not being very profitable in each of the individual units, right? So in a scenario like that, you could very easily say, you know what, that doesn't really work. If you were to look at a land development deal, for instance, okay, we'd want to say, first and foremost, is this a deal where we've got to go through and take entitlement risk, and then we're going to move some dirt or perhaps sell it off at that point, or am I buying something that's got a tentative map on it where I'm going to finish off the lots and sell those to builders, right? And your range of return profiles and what these three different items have to be is all dependent on the amount of risk that your client is taking in the process of executing that business plan.
Huge word, isn't it, risk? Because everybody's mind is kind of different on what they're willing to accept for risk. And kind of learn that one going through the last one. Risk is just huge, too.
I mean, that's really what
Drive.
these numbers are all about, is trying to quantify risk and
am I
place
getting
a value
paid,
on it.
and am I getting paid for the risk that I'm taking?
Mm-hmm.
Appropriately,
Mhm.
their expectation lines.
Yep. So any questions on any of that as we move into looking at this? Yeah.
I would very much be interested to know how you do structure this if you're going to look at it from a public perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our market's dominated almost wholly by public. So we run all of our cash flows from a public perspective. It's always going to net as our best value for the property as well when we are walking through with our sellers. Is there a way that you just shift some of these buckets a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's something that I'll walk Alex through how to do. the really, really simple answer to that is you don't have to pay attention to the difference between leveraged and unleveraged. Okay, you're going to look at it really from an unleveraged basis because you're not truly applying financing to the property, but you're going to shift over and take basically a cost of financing and put that as a line item in the project.
And that's what we do.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like tomato. Okay, for a typical deal like this, you're gonna make some assumption about the amount of debt that you can get, and in a Publix case, you're gonna make the assumption that 100% of the money comes from corporate, and as that money goes out, it earns a preferred return.
Okay.
Is at least the term that we like to use, but that becomes a line item, an above the line item that factors into your profitability of the deal. So you're still going to look at what the IRR is that comes out of the deal. You're still going to look at what that margin is, although your margin is going to be calculated based upon that preferred return, cost of financing line item, and you're still going to pay attention to what your equity multiple is. Although, admittedly, from a Publix perspective, I would look at an equity multiple as the least important of the three metrics, right? And the reason for that would be the money that a public home builder has is very easily able to be recycled back into future projects, right? Build a bunch of homes, sell them. Now corporate's got more money. They don't have to go give it back to somebody per se. They can put that back out the door.
Yeah, and we built it and reinvested right into our model because of that factor.
Interesting. With most of the private guys, the reason that there's often a big focus on equity multiple is a lot of the funds have been raised such that once that private equity fund makes an investment and the money comes back, it can never go back out the door, right? It gets swept aside.
Why is that?
Starts to be repaid to the investors. There is no reinvestment.
Okay.
So does that?
Yeah, no, I think that definitely helps.
Yeah, and go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, this is kind of trivial. I think you guys heard it. It's just because it's interesting. Jeff brought it up. What's the definition, let's just say in a Publix case, of gross profit?
That's versus net.
That change by builder.
I think Wynn has the right answer there.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of terms, and that's what makes all this confusing. No, you guys out
And
there.
that's just kind of a point.
I think there's a lot of, one thing you hear me talk about a lot is the terminology and the different vernacular that people use. And the confusing aspect of it is you can have one term that can be used amongst a lot of sophisticated people in very interchangeable ways. So I don't know if we have a defined answer for that.
I mean, Brian, I would tell you the way I typically think of it is it's gross profit excludes your G&A and your corporate cost of capital.
That was what he was told. And Jeff, did he talk to you guys about that? Yeah, so he came back and we went to lunch and he spent all this time with somebody on Ropa Ranch and he's like, do you know what gross profit is for a public home builder? He goes, do you feel stupid? I said, yeah, pretty much. So do I. 30 years of the business, I didn't know. But he has been, going out, and that's basically what it is. I mean, it really is, cost less, revenue, and it doesn't include all that other bucket of items you mentioned.
G&A and what?
Right.
And the capital, the cost to finance the capital.
Well, also sales, commissions, advertising. There's a lot of those things, and they supposedly don't put in that bucket. It's purely...
And that's where it gets very nebulous.
Yeah, exactly.
Because some guys will include some of those line items, some guys might not include some of those.
And KB's got a VC, and they've got a third bucket. And there's just a lot of that.
I think the reason they'll do that sometimes is a lot of those, let's call them below the line items, they're items that they're essentially paying to themselves, right? Your corporate cost of capital it's a way of allocating things internally, so to speak, right? I mean, the G&A line that you're putting into a deal, G&A for operation. The other stuff is money that's being spent and going out the door someplace else. And so,
That's a good way of looking at it.
yeah,
I think so. Because if you're paying yourself to do a service, that technically a part of the deal that is impacting what your returns are?
Mothership cost.
right. Right. When you put that corporate cost of capital in there, it's really just internal profit to somewhere. So if you're looking at that gross margin, for them in some ways it is a better way of actually judging before I start playing accounting tricks or whatever else you want to call it, what am I really making?
But it's not profit for the division, right? It's profit for the corporate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's when the accounting comes into it and starts putting it to all these different places. It still all rolls up under that one public entity, right? It's just a way of dividing it out.
Well, and one way I look at public home building is that, a Richmond American corporate, I mean, they're really in the business of borrowing money at X and lending it out to the division at Y. I mean, that's really their profit. I mean, you just have to, So all these divisional things are all games to way they allocate their internal cost and ways of looking at a deal.
Any other questions before we? Okay, and so we will, and I'll make sure that Alex has all the tools to be able to handle these deals from whichever approach you want to, public versus private. And remember too, at the end of the day, they're all basically getting to the same thing. They're just moving a couple of little pieces around. Although the one thing I would say is in the way that the publics are going to do it, and that structure, as you guys all know, it is likely to mean that they're going to still end up with the lowest cost of capital and the lowest return thresholds out there. It's just good to be able to figure out how you back into those numbers. So I think your thinking is spot on. All right, so Trev, which assumptions should we start with here?
I usually start with revenue assumptions and putting in the product mix.
You want to run with this here?
Has the student kind of become the teacher over there? What's going on?
Do you want to run this based on
Not that I know what that's like or anything.
Changes to these numbers?
I mean, is it just pretty self-explanatory? I mean, entering in the information that needs to enter. Do we want to cover that? Is that something Dave wanted to go through?
Well, so if you look at this particular model, right, the main things that have to be focused on, the things that Alex is going to be paying attention to, and the areas where if you're sitting down and you want to make some basic changes, it should be pretty self-explanatory. The part that I would start with, which I think Trevor's spot on about, is this revenue assumptions page, right? And it's simple and straightforward as could be. You need your unit mix, your home sizes, your pricing, your incentives, and your upgrades and your premiums. Okay? And it's set up so that you can have 12 different floor plans, throw it all together, you're good to go.
In this model, can you run multiple product lines with multiple timing aspects?
For simplicity purposes, this model assumes that you don't sell different product lines on different timelines.
Could you run it though as, let's say you had 2 product lines and there were 6 homes or 3 homes in each, so could you just run it at double the pace?
Well, the way this model works is we go in and we set on one of these other pages here, this timing assumptions, right? So if we look at this, this allows us to make an assumption about how long it would take to entitle the property if there are any entitlement work, how long it takes to do the land improvements, the building of the models, and then the start of the production homes. We then layer in when the sales start. It makes a project-wide assumption about how many units you sell a month.
So you could double that and.
You can set that to whatever you want.
Right.
The important thing to remember is it takes the average price of your unit mix and sells that many each month.
Got it.
Okay?
Does that absorption
Probably work.
That would still work,
calculate, or
right?
can you change that?
Yeah, it should.
Do you have to
You can change the absorption to however you want to, right? And that's, yeah, everything in this model, if it's yellow, it's a plug number.
Right.
If it's not yellow, you don't want to do anything to alter it. Right, so, for instance, Michelle, we could look at this deal which has 47 units and say, well, if I sold one of them a month, what happens?
Yeah.
Trev put this in here. I'm at a 17 IRR and a 1.7 multiple and making a 14% net margin. But if I start to bump this up, I go to 2, and boom, my IRR just jumped through the roof.
Yeah.
I got another 11 points of return in the deal just by selling 2 a month. But if you also think about that, you've gone, this particular deal is 47 units. So you just cut your time to sell this deal out in half. So naturally, the time-sensitive variable, being IRR, is going to improve.
Drastically, while the other metrics don't really jump around that much based on absorption.
Right, we're still at a 15% margin, which for a deal like this is higher end homes, expensive. You've got plenty of risk. That's the kind of number you want to be at. And you can see if we go to 3, for instance, Michelle. You're asking about this.
Yeah.
How does that reflect then as you do that? How does that reflect back to the number at the end of the day, like caught me off guard? So it goes from, I'm thinking it's 35 and you change the thing and you can go to the number right away and say, well, if it only did 1 a month, then you're going to be at 28 million, not 35.
Well, that's just solving to a different metric if you want to solve to what somebody's looking for in terms of an IRR return versus solving to a net profit margin.
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and play that out, because Mike asked a good question. If everybody couldn't hear, it's what is the value going to look like in this case if I go from 1 unit a month, 2 units a month, to 3 units a month? Okay, so if that's the case, let's start at 1 unit a month. If I come in and I look at my return profile here, and I'm at a 17% IRR and a 1.7x multiple, and a 14% net margin, that number is not going to fly, right? And the reasons why would be, this particular deal has the profile for a private home builder, right? Because it's expensive product. That's more likely to be who the player is here. So I think I'm going to need at least a 15% margin, but I'm going to need to get that IRR.
Closer to 20.
I think your number here says 25.
25.
Okay, so to do that, I may look at this and say, closer, but I'm still not getting there. There you go. 30. So let's call the value here 26, right? Which is saying if I'm going to sell them that slow, I've got to have a higher net margin on those homes. You're doing nicely because you've bumped up kind of on a 2x equity multiple and you're getting north of a 20 IRR. A deal like this at 1 unit a month, 47 units, I mean, this is a 5-year project. So that starts to fall more in line. But if I can turn around and I can sell 2 units a month, so I'm cutting the timing of this deal completely in half.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm now at a 37 IRR, which I don't need to be that high.
Now you can adjust purchase price.
I can adjust my purchase price up, and let's try 28 million, which I can still say, deal like this, you can probably get more aggressive.
You back solve.
Yeah, I was about to ask, is the purchase price in this model always an input?
Yes.
But you could technically back solve.
You could goal seek it, or
Yeah,
I could build in a a macro button for you to click and enter in what you want.
Yeah.
Make it easier.
Yeah, we have one that we're playing with where we affect IRR and I think the reinvestment number.
IRR reinvestment, and then we had a finished lot value. I think we were with that.
No,
we got it.
Go back all to
Mm-hmm.
a purchase price.
Well, what's so important for me in this thing is I look at it and say, this piece of property, my seller has an expectation of $33 million, and we're working around 26 and 28. I've still got to be positive because I want the listing. Now what am I doing to show him, hey, if you're at this, this, and this, which is why I like this, by the way. Hey, when you do a pure cash flow, you got to say, hey, in order to get your number that you want, we'd love to get it, but we're going to have to be at this in the sales price, we're going to have to be this in an IRR, and this is a gross margin, net margin. Is that realistic? And there's got to be a way of explaining that.
Well, maybe not. That's where you can show the range, right, from worst case scenario to best case, and somewhere in between, and tweak those numbers so you can show him, right, the price are going to look at the deal this way, with that kind of IRR and equity multiple, and your purchase price are going to be X. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you can show them the difference.
Yeah, that's what we did with Stonecliff.
Yep.
You're exactly right. And I think what's so important here that you guys are starting to pick up on is, and as we've seen a few times now, we do a static pro forma and it's $40 million. We do a cash flow pro forma, it's $22 million, and then everyone says, well, I can't get the listing at $22 million. That's when you look at these different levers, as we would call them, and you can't just go to 4 units a month, but maybe it's, and the other thing I think about too is everyone seems to move, and not us, but the world moves in big chunks. If it's not 1, it's 2. If it's not 2, it's 3. Well, what if it was 1.7 or something like that, and you can use the different levers so that none of them seem like an outrageous assumption, yet every single one has a little bit of an impact. So you can move your cost down a little bit, move your absorption up a little bit, and you move them in small increments to kind of back into a number, the $33 million, so that you can still get the listing, but not come to him with assumptions that just seem outrageous.
Well, and you can also use it to say, like in this case, Mike, to realize, okay, this deal may be more sensitive to the number of units I absorb a month than it is to a change in my top line pricing. So you can tell your client, my focus is going to be digging into all the competitive products here to make sure that I maximize your value by finding the data and making the case that 2 units a month is doable based upon the competition or whatever else that might be.
So you come in a little lower on your sales price so you have more velocity? Is that what you're, those?
Well, I'm saying you can understand what the variables are that a particular project has the most sensitivity to. So as the broker on that deal, you can go look for the information that is going to make the most compelling case to prospective buyers that they can get to 3 absorptions a month or a different amount on premiums than they may think that they could. You understand where that sensitivity is.
And one of the excuse me, just 1 second, or I'm going to forget. I think I already did forget. If you've got, here's where it gets a little bit confusing, because if you have sales and our chart happens to start November, okay, and now we're trying to do 2 sales a month, well, notoriously, not speaking for Orange County, sales are not really that good through Super Bowl in February. So sales are down. And then typically they're the highest between June and September. Historically in Orange County, I'm speaking. And that's never reflected it can't be really reflected in a pro forma. But one of them can be really hurt by it starting off with real slow sales. And if I had actually started that
in June versus starting in
I might have had 10 sales instead of 2. And I don't, just as a...
Well, I think the thought I would offer is, yes, does it make a difference, but is it that material? Over the life of a typical project that you're underwriting, no, it's not. And based upon how hard it is for people to actually get permits or get other approvals in place to try and say, this project's going to close, you're going to start in June, is, in my opinion, as much as I understand exactly what you're saying, they're just going to look at it and say, over the course of a year, how many units do I get sold? Knowing that by going for a whole year, they get the pros and the cons of each of those months.
And then now
Because you can't, it's so hard to control timing in today's world.
And I agree, by the way. It's just
Yeah, but
interesting.
interesting comment. Yeah, absolutely.
But you could potentially juice the number, like, again, let's say you open it right in February, and you have a higher absorption rate in your model in February, in those summer months, then it tails off in the winter. You're showing more profit up front. It helps things like your IRR and stuff like that. It could potentially be the difference between making a deal.
Can you say that to your client in just discussion?
Even if on the average across the life of the project, it's the same.
Should probably equal itself out though.
Well, I think that's what Steve's getting at. I mean, so you're absolutely right. And for some situations, maybe it's, you can try to plug it in and see if it works, but I think what Steve's getting at is how material of an impact is it really at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Maybe it moves to 21.5 to 21.9 or something like that. And every once in a while, that's the little bit that you need. But I think at the end of the day, it's kind of, most people are pretty accustomed to kind of spreading out over the course of a year, assuming that, what's our average going to be.
That's not really how the builders or the capital group are
They're
actually
going to look at it. No way. They're not going to allow you to sell 8 in
You
month
just be
one.
promising something to your seller that you probably actually couldn't.
Well, and I think at a very high level, what we've heard a lot of, especially as we've come through this cycle, has been, if the old historical rule of thumb used to be you get 4 sales a month in a project. People got back in, started putting money back out the door 3-4 years ago thinking I was going to get 4 units a month. And they didn't. They were getting 1 or 2. That has been a deal killer for them, right? Deals they thought they were going to make a 25 or 30 IR on, they delivered at 14.
Still in it.
Or they're still in it. Okay, so if in terms of just getting people comfortable and moving value, I would spend my time focusing on that number they're using for the duration of the project. Because I think that's where a lot of their minds will be. While you certainly can make the case that, you actually, you could really outperform in these spots if you're lucky. But the difference from going to 2 to 3 units a month, in most cases, is the difference between a project probably working and not working.
Well, and backing up to what you're saying as far as the different levers and understanding what is actually going to affect the price, I think if you go into a seller with that sort of mentality, and it's going to show that you have a very clear plan as to how you're going to sell their property. Mm-hmm. And even putting an example in front of them and saying, look, we can move revenues up $50,000, and we can argue all day about that, but look what it actually does to your purchase price, versus if we focus on absorption. So that's my goal, is to focus on, it makes you look a lot more savvy than we probably generally look, understanding the different, this is what's going to maximize your values, this little thing right here, as opposed to everybody's going to want to talk about how much you can sell the houses for. That matters, but it doesn't matter as much as this.
Mm-hmm. And the premiums too. The premiums and the absorption, right? Your costs on the back end, so those are all different things that you need to massage. And it's really an art. It's an art to massage those different numbers to the best, most optimistic scenario without looking silly.
Yeah.
But you're right. The more that you can speak to those, and that's why I think it's so important that we go over this together, because now you're already thinking about ways to speak from a more sophisticated level to your seller that will only, I think, get more credibility for you in the long run.
Yeah.
So it's the best piece of property in Yorba Linda doesn't work anymore?
Well, that's the difficulty too, is trying not to make it too complicated, because yes, this is how the buyers are going to look at it, but many sellers are just going to go blurry if you get too deep, and so that's the dynamic that's always difficult with our sellers, is because they don't want to dive into this deep level of detail.
I agree, and that is a challenge. And as you're saying that, I'm wondering if there's a way just to keep it at a very high level, with bullet points, and your cost, your revenue, your absorption, your premium, just lay out the few levers that there are for them, and try to simplify it as much as possible. So I think without getting into the model itself, and and showing how it tinkers, just explaining what those different aspects are, that they do have a lot of movement, and then trying to back that into a strategy, as Steve had mentioned earlier, based on what competing product there is.
Well, and also never losing sight of the fact that the cost to complete, right, which is separate from the pro forma here, but their ability, your seller's ability to deliver or have something that's useful on that front is absolutely huge. And depending upon who your buyer profile is going to be, public versus private, if it's private or it's a land development deal, can they access financing? Can they sign for debt? Yeah.
But I still like the idea that Quinn's talking about, Mish was talking about, is if we just had a couple of these, Dave, to your point as well, 3 or 4 of them, and just say, hey, but if you did have 2 sales a week, your number could be this. If your revenues were 40 grand higher, they could be this. That's the exciting part about your property. You got one that I just want you to know it's a variable here that's really important.
Well, I think that's what you guys have been kind of talking about in our BOVs, and that is that you basically, if you can, picture, here you are, and here's the whatever 5 or 6 assumptions, and here's A, B, C, D, and you move those levers, and then here are the results below it, keeping it super simple. You move directs, you move absorption, you move revenue, you move, whether it's...
We just did an analysis just like that on a project, and it's a metric, and it shows the different levers. And
they're not giving your performer, but they can talk about assumptions, and they can show how it impacts it directly.
Exactly.
Very visual and
great.
very easy to
Yeah, would it be possible to do a sensitivity analysis for kind of the top 5 levers for what we're calling?
Pulling that many levers in one direction or the other, if you pull them all down, that's going to have a drastic drop in your purchase price, or if you move them all up, it's going to increase the value in a big way.
Taking 1 or 2 of them.
Taking 1 or 2 and moving them.
Well, I think each project is probably a little bit different.
Yeah.
It may be absorption, it may be revenue, whatever it may be. I think if you can have almost a worst case scenario, and then you can have this best case, scenario.
I think you should pick the variables you want to move, not
that's true, because
it's not everything.
Because the worst case could be awful, which you don't want to present. So it's kind of showing the best worst case, or the
revenues go up, premiums go up, costs go down, the absorptions go up. All of a sudden, it's just your land is worth $1 billion.
But I like the one, being able to say one. If your directs are 87 and they jump to 95, here's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to have your subs do a better job for you, and you can do it for 87, just planting the seed.
Mm-hmm.
Again, is what you guys are talking about. That's what I like doing for these guys, not telling them what to do. So, and boy, these things just really bring it out. When you did that with me a couple of weeks ago, it was an eye-opener, because I'm so used to a static performance, here's what it's worth today. And I've been doing it for 48 years. That changed everything.
There's not as much sensitivity. Yeah.
There's none.
Is there a tab on here that flows out revenue and cost on one page?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Just when we've been working on a couple, I've always gone through it visually. You can see if something's screwed up by just looking at how it flows.
Yeah.
And go, that's not.
That's what we have right here. Is we show here are all the revenues up on the top side. You got your development costs there down below, and then we show as we move out when units are started, when they're delivered, when they're sold. So you start seeing all this flow through here, and get a chance to look at what those cash flows look like, as you can see along this line here without any leverage. And then if we move down lower, we can see what it looks like when you layer financing onto it.
Anybody in the audience have any questions? Seattle?
I have a question. Do
Yeah.
publics generally look at a levered IRR?
No.
Right, okay, all right.
Yeah. And I can walk you through that offline.
I've got a question on the assumptions page.
Yeah. The revenue assumptions?
Yes. So, is there a way to input premiums and upgrades as a percentage?
Yeah, I built that in on the side over there.
Okay, because typically we look at like an overall percentage of
Go that right,
premiums
please.
for the whole project.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, Trevor built it in
Okay.
by
That's not an
inputs.
input cell, right? So we have to.
Well,
The 2 and the
That's
5
what I'm
are.
saying. Is there a way to make that a yellow and
The 2
do an
and 5.
input cell?
well,
The 2 and the 5% were
If you change it up.
input cells.
Yeah, I have it
Oh,
so
they were.
so you can set it up
Okay.
either way. You can
Alright.
calculate it, or you can put in a number
Okay.
and it'll calculate the percentage for you.
Either way.
How would you swap that over?
Well, right now, if you just go out to the right, Steve, I
yeah,
mean, we can make it
well,
a little bit
now,
more
No,
functional.
Mish, the simplest way would be to say, all right, my premium's 3%, and so I just hit equals. Right, so you can always back into it. No, I mean, we're in yellow cells, you can do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's in on the right, though, it's already set up as a percentage you can enter, and it would have linked
Yes,
it in.
I know, but
Okay.
we have to make
Yeah.
it.
So if it is set up as a percentage, why are they all the same?
Because it was a percentage,
Average?
It's just an average.
an average. Yeah, I mean, these, each deal's a little bit different, so we'll find every time you go into one of these, you maybe input it a little bit different way.
Right.
And there is no perfect right or wrong answer. At the end of the day, if you're gonna make any of these changes, you always just wanna go back in there and double check that it's coming through
That it makes sense.
properly. And,
Mhm.
with all these models, it's always good to step back for a minute, look at it from the big picture, go to, the monthly cash flow page we just went to, and make sure things are rolling through in the way that you believe they should.
We got you guys structure your directs and fees assumptions.
And Ian, this is one of those that I told directly and asked them, what are your directs on your project at Encore,
Okay.
which is next door. So I just took their current
Easy way
cost
out.
and threw it in, yeah.
Yeah, so, this is pretty straightforward. I mean, the inputs don't look a whole lot different than the revenue assumptions page that we were just on. You can enter your direct cost per square foot, your indirects per square foot. You're able to set a margin on your options and your upgrades. And then fees are broken out down below that allow you to input school fees, your development impact fees, and to do that broken down if they're due at grading permit or building permit, and then your building permit fees. Right, and that, once again, will just all flow through the rest of the model.
Can you go to the page that shows the finished lot value again? I think that's the assumptions page, right?
Yeah.
So your finished lot value there is 773,704, right? Per unit.
Mhm.
That's correct.
And
Now,
the
there
land
is
value-
another page in here, which I think is a very, very good and very valuable page for all you guys to keep in mind. This is basically just a front sheet, kind of set up in a more detailed way that's showing each of the plans, the revenues on each of the units, and it's showing all my costs associated with it. So when it's all said and done, this will give us, not just the revenues that we saw up above there, shows us what the cost of the land is, what my land development costs are, and it does its best to spread this accurately over each floor plan. Shows me where my finished lot basis comes in, which you can see right there. Tells me that that's 38% of my sales price, and then just allows us to keep backing down. It has some detail on the actual housing costs, so you got your directs and your indirects in there and everything else that's going to go into the deal. And then ultimately, Brian, to go back to your question, is really when it says profit before G&A, that is effectively, the gross margin in the deal. Okay, because we also back financing costs out, and when it's all said and done, you're able to sit here and look at what your profitability is on each of the individual units, and you can kind of look at this and say, does that make sense? Does it make sense that Plan 1 is going to be more profitable than Plan 2? It may or may not. And you can sometimes figure out what are mistakes that you've perhaps found in the deal, right? Because you look at this, you say, all right, well, I got a 20% margin on Plan 4 and an 8.5 on this. Does it make sense? What other tabs in here?
I mean, the front sheet in terms of entering soft costs and cost of sales.
One other spot to point out in this model is this, what's called the front sheet tab. This is where all the soft costs are entered, right? So you can see, and then this probably looks kind of familiar based upon a lot of the static models that have been used. You have the ability to enter in all your assumptions relative to your sales and your closing costs.
When?
Thanks, Win.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
You got it. As well as your various soft costs that are once again in your yellow cells here. Right, and this stuff, it's easy to get in and make some changes. It can be adjusted based upon a percentage of sales price, a per square foot amount, totals per unit. There's a lot of variability in it.
Because you all see the builder say, I'm only at 19% of my soft costs, and you're showing yours at 23. Well, everything's so minute. Does that really make that huge a difference? And then I don't want to be ignorant in answering it, because you think that it would make a difference at 4% difference. But do you guys ever, what does your number typically come to today on soft cost total? 21%?
Well, if you include the total cost of sale, so your closing costs, we probably look between 18 and 21.
Yeah, maybe 22.
Okay, that's what I heard.
Soft cost alone probably 18, and then get into the 21, 22 when you start adding in sales
That's
costs.
what you brought up before. I
Yeah.
agree.
Scroll across, Steve, if you would.
No, that way, I just want to see the total soft cost percentage. Where is 13?
So 13.4.
That seems low, right?
Yeah. And then what do they have up top? 13.4 plus.
13.4 plus 4.5. So that gets you to 18 when you include your sales and your closing costs. It also, look at this deal in particular. Yeah, it doesn't feel too off.
We were talking about this with Jeff the other day. How does your model recovery work?
Good question. You just hit probably the most debated and complex thing in building industry in all of them. What we assume is that it is we've done it differently in a different version of this model, haven't we?
Recovering the cost of...
And here I think it's just recovering a percentage of the cost of the
model.
Right, in this case it's shown as a contra cost.
Yeah.
Which means when those last units are sold off, you get that back in and it offsets your project cost side of things. I believe that at one point Trevor and I took a different version of this model we've been working on for a while and decided, we didn't put that up above the line, did we, as a revenue? On that other version?
I don't think so.
Because the builder community typically takes that model and says, all right, it's the last one to sell, and the house is $500,000, we're selling it for $590 because I had roughly $90,000 worth of improvements in it, and they get their money back that way. That's the way I've seen it for years and years.
I don't know if we moved that above or not.
I'm not sure if we did
We moved a
either.
couple line items, but I'm not sure if that was one of them.
And I think you'll find a lot of debate about the right way to do that. I mean, I can also tell you, at one point, we did, this version doesn't show it, but we've moved warranty up to be an offset to revenues. Right, because you don't pay for the warranty expense unless you sell the home. So you can actually pay for that out of the revenues that come in the door.
It's the cost of sale, not
It's not something that you'd have to cut a check for to somebody.
Makes sense. I might have missed it, but where is inflation in this? Or can you affect that?
Inflation is
And assumptions.
on this assumptions tab, right up here.
Do you have it on cost as well?
So you have sale price inflation, which is the top of the two lines here, which it can vary out over each of the years, and then you have cost inflation right there.
Does that go on land development is what I mean?
That goes, is applicable to our direct costs, and Trev, do you remember the?
You never use inflation.
Yeah, I mean.
So I'm not sure.
Right.
That makes it look bad.
Yeah. You need inflation to make it work. It doesn't work.
Our models.
To your cost?
Yeah, we're putting it on revenue, we're putting it on cost, we're putting it on directs, if we feel like there's a reason to put in inflation, but we at least have a spot for it.
Specifically for things that have a long tail, or we're not gonna, they're gonna buy development on this half, where what we're quoting development at right now is.
For the average deal, it's probably not that applicable.
Well, but I would tell you, going back to this question of where are the places you can try and push the buttons to convince people to assume things that will drive the most value. If you can convince somebody that it's appropriate to use a little bit of inflation, you go into these things and you see what the delta is with that, the sensitivity to it. That's a huge kind of thing. So to the extent that you know that and you understand it, then you can go seek out the data points to support that argument, to make somebody more comfortable, and you can tell your client and your seller, hey, here's what we're going to focus on because we believe the market's going to move X, Y, or Z amount. That's the kind of thing that, when you step back and say, that's a real value add in the sales process.
What's the difference of appreciation and inflation then in a home? When you read the Burns report, it goes, appreciation's 3% for the next 2 years, and we're going to drop it to 1.5%.
It's the same.
Yeah,
Isn't that the same?
Yeah.
we use them interchangeably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully we're wrong.
That's another example of the same words mean different things and different words mean the same things.
I'm like 95% confident that the input for direct inflation does not affect fees or land development.
In this particular model, it only inflates
Directs
the,
and softs, I believe.
the directs and indirects, and the options. Okay. And I'm not going to tell you that's exactly necessarily the right way to do it, but.
It's the way it's working in here.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure if you wanted, you probably could put inflation on the other.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
A line or.
Easily. No, and look, as part of this whole process, especially as Alex begins working through a bunch of these deals, and there are questions, things we want to talk about, why are we doing it this way versus that way? Should we make some updates? That's what Trevor and I do every day for all these deals. It's a constant ongoing process as you gather more information from the market and how deals are working. One deal makes you think about something new you hadn't thought about before, so you figure out a way to build that in to have the functionality for it as you work your way down the line. And would hope as you guys start digging through this and making changes, love talking about that and figuring out how we continue to make things better.
Looks great so far.
Well, hey, in the essence of time, unless we have more questions either here or on the phone, why don't we call it a wrap? And we'd love to get your feedback, guys. If I want everyone to think about this as far as training. And next go around, is there another topic that you guys have an idea that you want to understand more? Is it more financial analysis, getting a little bit deeper on things? So not anything we need to address now, but want you guys to think about it so that we're putting on our advisor trainings that are most worthwhile for you.